Hi, my name is Annika, and I have had type 1 diabetes for most of my life. I was diagnosed in 1980 when I was 2 years old. I think that in some ways makes me quite lucky. I've never known what it is to be without diabetes. So I've grown up with it, but it has always been a bit of a beast. My childhood wasn't too bad, although the equipment and the insulins of the time, they were very new synthetic insulins. So things were probably a little tricky compared to today. A lot has changed in 40 years of diabetes research and medicine. So my childhood was reasonably easy considering the meters, the medicines, and what knowledge there was in those times. My teens was very difficult. I think once hormones kicked in and just being a teen kicked in, really, I didn't really want to know much in terms of diabetes. I was keen to sort of just get on with my life. Once I'd gotten to my late teens, I wanted to party and festivals and do all of the things that young people do. I was 21 when I was diagnosed with the eye condition, proliferative diabetic retinopathy. And when it was found, it was already quite significant. So I had to have an awful lot of laser therapy. To date, I've had somewhere in the region of 55,000 burns, and that, as you can imagine, has caused some fair damage to my eyes, and the resulting scarring has now led to me being registered as severely sight impaired. But again, it sounds a little bizarre, but I think in a way, I was lucky that the damage, the deterioration of the sight didn't happen immediately. It was gradual, and so I had time to adapt. But at the same time, it has taken a lot of my independence away. I do depend on my husband a huge amount these days. So that is, quite difficult, and it was quite a blow to be diagnosed with that at such a young age. The gastroparesis came later. It was discovered that I had gastroparesis when I was heavily pregnant with my first and only daughter. Learnt my lesson the first time round. And she is an absolute joy to have, I have to say, but pregnancy and diabetes is not for the faint-hearted. It was very difficult in terms of keeping control on the diabetes, and it wasn't until much later in my pregnancy that things went really quite horribly wrong. I was sick the whole way through my pregnancy and really quite unwell. And it was put down to pregnancy sickness, the usual to be expected side effects of growing a human. It wasn't until my late pregnancy when basically my digestive system stopped working, and that put my daughter and I in quite a difficult position. It was a chance meeting between my diabetes consultant and a friend of hers who's a gastro specialist. He came to see me as a favour to her, and he saw exactly what was going on, which was great, and helped me and my daughter through that period. I've a lot to be thankful for there. that was a really quite traumatic time for diabetes management. In my late stages, it was very difficult to keep my sugar level up. I guess that the energy that the body takes to keep sustaining the baby means that you know, it uses up an awful lot of energy. So it was, yes, it was a really difficult time. But 10 years on, I'm still suffering with the gastroparesis, and that hasn't gone, but it's not as severe and life-threatening as it was whilst I was pregnant. It's something that has taken away quite a lot of my freedom. The symptoms are very unpleasant. I spend quite a bit of my time, particularly in the mornings, feeling nauseous, suffer with acid reflux, and take medication to keep on top of that. But also, you know, the periods where your stomach gets quite blocked up, you feel bloated, then, you know, you don't know when your system is going to properly digest your food. So diabetic control is really difficult. You know, I found that I was going hypo halfway through eating a meal and having to stop what I was eating in order to drink some cola or something to bring it back up, by which time, you know, your dinner's gone cold, and that's not too nice. But the other side of that also is that you get spikes at very random times, and often followed by periods of horrible diarrhea episodes and things like that. So every day is unpredictable. I always make plans because otherwise I wouldn't do anything at all. But it does mean that sometimes I'm tied to the house. I guess many people that have conditions like irritable bowel syndrome would chime with what I'm saying, that you're always concerned about whether there's a toilet nearby and things like that. You know, it comes with a fair amount of anxieties. So the few years that led to me seeking help with my diabetes from Adam Brooks were very frustrating. I've always, as I said, diabetes has always been a bit of a beast for me. Hormones, just the fluctuations that my diabetes has given me has made it very difficult to manage a lot of the time. And I've done my best, but there were, you know, when you go to see consultants and they say, oh, your HbA1c is too high, and it's quite demoralizing because you can know some of the reason why. You can say, well, you know, my tummy hasn't been good. The change of the seasons is another thing that I've always known affected me. In the winter, I would get spikes in sugar level, and in the summer, I'd get lots of hypos. And that is now proven to be a known thing. When the temperature goes up, it affects your sensitivity to insulin. I didn't know that as it was at the time, but you know, the medical profession largely, I think, rolled their eyes at my excuses, and it becomes very demoralizing when you're doing the best you can, but the blood results on paper don't support what you're telling people. And I knew that a lot of my issues were happening overnight. What didn't help is that some 10 years or so ago, I also lost a friend to a nighttime hypo. He was diabetic as well, you see, and he slipped into a coma overnight and didn't come out of it. And that put me in great fear of hypo, particularly nocturnal hypos. I've always had reasonable hypo awareness, but I was finding, particularly I think because of the gastroparesis, having some fairly sudden hypos that you just didn't feel coming would put me into a panic, and so I would overcompensate and just, you know, eat until I felt better, which then puts your sugar level at a much higher level afterwards, obviously. But also, before going to bed, I wasn't keen to go to bed on anything, you know, a level less than, say, 10 millimoles. And although that doesn't sound particularly high, over a long period of time, that does take its toll. My problem really was that my sugar levels during the night would either drop off dramatically or spike dramatically. And I tried many different insulins. I was put onto metformin to see if that would help, which isn't terribly good for your stomach, for the gastroparesis. And also, you know, I was testing an awful lot, and that's quite hard going on the fingers. It was all just a bit too much. My diabetes consultant that had looked after me during my pregnancy was fabulous. She referred me to the pump clinic at my local hospital, and I went to see them to see whether or not I would be able to manage pump therapy based on my vision, and whether it would be suitable for me or not. So I went to them, and they did some tests to establish what was going on. But I waited maybe 3 years. They kept saying, you know, yes, you'll be on a waiting list for an insulin pump, and we think it will help, but you know, the list is a long list. And so after around 3 years, I saw a diabetes community nurse who had previously worked at Addenbrooke's, and she was quite horrified looking at my notes to see the medication that I was on and the length of time that I had waited just to try pump therapy. And she suggested, you know, I explained, you know, that really I felt I was being fobbed off by my hospital. They weren't looking after my overall diabetes care. I was just sort of arriving, being told, yes, you're on the waiting list. See you again in 6 months, and that 6 months might not be 6 months. And I was very despondent. I was very depressed with this. I just felt I was falling through the cracks in terms of all care, really. I was very well looked after by the gastroenterology team and the team that have looked after my vision. But under this particular doctor for my diabetes, I felt that I'd been pushed into a corner and forgotten. And they were very reluctant, I think, to let me try pump therapy because of my visual difficulties. Bearing in mind at the time I was using an insulin pen and counting the clicks because I couldn't see them. I was already struggling in some ways with that and asking my husband to help me with dispensing my daily pills into a divider and so on. I think they just didn't Well, I don't know, but this community nurse who had worked at Addenbrooke's previously suggested I approach Addenbrooke's via my GP, which is what I did. So I went to Addenbrooke's and met Dr. Bansia, and she introduced me to Sarah. And since then, I have to say, I've never looked back. I was at rock bottom by the time I'd gone to them. I really didn't know what to do. I'd tried everything that I could, and I just felt so despondent. And, you know, having the visual difficulties because of the diabetes, having gastro difficulties because of diabetes, and I'd just been given an MRI scan for my head because there was some concern that dizzy spells that I was getting could be down to damage from diabetes. You start to think, well, hang on, I'm only coming up for 40. I have a young daughter who needs my care, and I've got a problem that I can't control. And I just didn't, I knew what I needed, I just didn't have the tools to make it happen. I didn't have the tools in my armory that could explain where I was going wrong. And so I was pretty desperate by the time I went to Addenbrooke's. But the day that I went, I was fitted with a monitoring sensor. They very quickly established what was going on. And then I was spoken to about the CamAPS technology, which I couldn't really believe. It's very new technology, and for somebody who started out with syringes, vials, and dipsticks to survive on, I was amazed at what this technology was. But then the cost was explained to me, and my heart sank because, you know, being technically blind, having a young child and having my husband caring for me, I couldn't justify I couldn't pay that sort of money. We couldn't, there's no way we could have afforded it. But Sarah went away, and over time, she told me that the team were applying for funding for me, and I am so unbelievably lucky to have been given the opportunity to be funded to try the technology. I was incredibly emotional about that, and still feel a lump in the throat talking about it now. I started with the technology a year ago, almost to the day, in fact. A year and 3 days, I think we're at now, and I haven't looked back. It's been challenging to get used to. It's 3 separate pieces of equipment effectively to get to know, but very quickly, I was surprised, very quickly I learnt my way around the app, the CamAPS app. The pump is what I need most help with. My husband does the refill for me, but the Dexcom sensors, I manage that myself independently. I can manage the app myself independently, and it was just such a revelation to me to see in real time what my sugar level was doing. where it was going wrong. And we had to get the process going so gently because of the history with my eye problem. We had to be very careful to avoid further damage to the eyes by improving the control too quickly. But even so, tiny baby steps, it fell into line so quickly. It's astounding. I'm running at levels that I could have only dreamed of before, and constantly. I wake up in the morning with a sugar level of around 7 every day, and it still amazes me because before it was always 18, 19, 20, regardless of whether or not I'd had a hypo in the night. The alarm systems that the app gives have released me from a great deal of my hypo fear. It means that I'm more willing to take a risk on having lower sugar levels because I know that the technology will warn me if I'm going too low, and I can fix my hypo with a lot less glucose because I don't panic. I can have the prescribed amount of glucose and watch in real time as the sugar level starts to recover. So I don't feel that need to eat until I feel better. And I can sleep better at night, and that makes such a big difference to every sense of your well-being, just to sleep well and to feel relaxed in the knowledge that you're not on the precipice of something that could put you in hospital or potentially kill you. In terms of my vision, as I say, I've been surprised that it has been a lot easier to manage than I expected. The app is very well laid out. It doesn't change very much. It is very simply laid out and very well labeled. So once I had started to use it, it became very quickly familiar, and I'm able to do that with the help of a magnifier, which I take everywhere with me anyway. So say with the pump, it's just a case of my husband helps with the refill. I can't tell you how much better my whole life is because of this technology, and that sounds like a big exaggeration, but for the peace of mind, for just to feel the load lifted. I've carried the burden of diabetes from a very young age. I've managed my own diabetes from the age of 8. Started injecting myself at age 6. So my whole life has been carrying the load alone. And sometimes in the face of unspoken criticism, and to have come off quite badly in terms of the retinopathy and the gastroparesis. And suddenly I have these gadgets that do it for me. It's like having your hand held. It's indescribable, really. In the first few months, I could only explain it to Sarah by saying, well, if you imagine looking after a naughty child in a labyrinth in the dark and being expected to control it at all times and know what's going on. You get the occasional hint of what might be happening, but constantly you feel you're failing, and the place is getting trashed. And it's like somebody has come along and flicked on the light. You can see everything. You can see the full picture. You can see what you need to do, where you need to go. And it hasn't made everything perfect. That's, you know, for me, for my eyes, it's too late. But for my gastroparesis, I'm already feeling an improvement, which is something I hadn't expected. But I do feel an improvement in how my digestive system is working. And we're on to new horizons now, because I've just stopped taking metformin. My insulin intake, I'm taking roughly 2/3 of the amount of insulin that I used to, simply because the delivery is better, and the system is now adjusting to me not having the metformin, and I almost don't have to do anything to enable that. And we're hoping that doing away with the metformin will also improve my digestive system in how it works. It's exciting. I really love this technology. Yes, I wish it had been around a lot sooner, because I'm sure it would have prevented an awful lot of trouble. I can only think how wonderful it would have been to have this technology during pregnancy in particular, because you know during pregnancy that control is critical. And as I said, it was very difficult towards the end, you know, being constantly vomiting, interspersed with cans of Lucozade. It was tough. It was really tough. And to think that this technology at the time could have mitigated a lot of that. But I feel really excited for the future generations. I feel occasionally guilty that I have such a privileged position to be given this technology, and it's so valuable to me. And I hate to think of going back, but I also hate to think that there are so many other people out there who maybe don't even know this technology exists and what it can do for them. I was asked to think about pros and cons for CamAPS, and for me personally, there aren't any cons. The one caveat to that I would say is that can you imagine, if I was still 20 years old and partying, would I be comfortable with being attached to the equipment all of the time? Perhaps for a younger person, they may be more conscious of it. But on reflection, I think probably not as conscious as perhaps it is to carry around syringes and needles and all of that. And you know, it swings and roundabouts, really. I can't see any downfalls with the CamAPS technology. I think it's wonderful.